Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. For a very long time, the main thing that most readers outside of France knew about Gérard de Nerval was that he had been quoted by T.S. Eliot in The Waste Land. Le prince d'Aquitaine à la tour abolie. Just one line towards the end of the poem that comes from Nerval's El Desdichado. Fortunately, and mainly thanks to this volume, selected writings edited and translated by Richard Sieburth and published by Penguin, more and more readers are coming to discover Nerval, but not enough of them, if you ask me. I have a fascination with this author, and I want to share with you some ideas on him, primarily through an exploration of a text by him that is one of his most famous ones, titled Aurélia, which has been described as a memoir of madness, among other things, and you can certainly find that in this book right here. So the first thing that I want to do is to share with you some information about Nerval, but I'm going to focus here. I'm going to share information with you that has to do directly with the text that we are going to be exploring. So first of all, his dates. He was born in 1808 and he passed away in 1855. So that means he lived a very short life, unfortunately. He was only 46 years old when he passed away. And the first important year for our purposes is 1836. This is the year when Nerval fell desperately in love with a woman, a singer and actress named Jenny Colon. At first, he seems to have touched her heart, but eventually she married a flutist from the Opéra Comique. This caused a great deal of heartbreak for Nerval. And she is important because Jenny Colon is the basis for the character of Aurélia in the text that we are about to explore. After that, in 1841, Gérard de Nerval suffered his first major nervous breakdown and he was placed in an institution. The year after that, 1842, Jenny Colon passed away. So as you can imagine, that caused more heartbreak for him. And as a result of that, it was that the following year, 1843, he decided to travel to the East and also to study mythology. These two things, the East and mythology, are very important if you're planning to read Aurélia because they are things that interested him that are almost like interwoven into the fabric of that nervous breakdown that he suffered. These interests became obsessions after he had this problem. So you can definitely tell when you read Aurélia that these were preoccupations that he was dealing with. Then in 1851 he suffered his second major nervous breakdown, and the last years of his life, 1853 to 1855, are marked by just deteriorating health, and eventually, unfortunately, he committed suicide by hanging himself from the bar of a window. He was found there in the streets of Paris. So it's a very sad story that we have here. Now there's something really interesting about Nerval, and that is his name. Because our author was born Gérard Labrunie. Gérard de Nerval is a pseudonym that he chose, and it's amazing all that he packed into this last name Nerval. So when people ask you what's in a name, as you know, most of the time the answer is quite a lot, and Nerval is no exception to that. This man idolized, he had adoration for his mother. She passed away when he was only 2 years old, so I think we can safely assume that he did not really remember her, but it was the mythological figure of his mother that he was so fascinated by. His mother's last name was Laurent, L-A-U-R-E-N-T. But as you know, that T, that final T, is silent, so you are left with L-A-U-R-E-N. Now if you take that and you read it backwards, what you get is Nerval, with a U right there in the middle. But in Latin, as you know, the U was spelled like a V. So that's where you get Nerval. It's basically the last name of his mother, read backwards. There's another thing here, because you may wonder, okay, yeah, but why Latin, right? Why would you spell it the way that it would be in Latin? Here's the thing. Nerval also considered himself to be a descendant of the Emperor Nerva. That's a Roman emperor. That's of course, a mythology. He had a whole mythological idea of his origins and his genealogy. But you can see all the connections that he was just packing into that last name that he chose as a pseudonym. And I think that's quite impressive for somebody to pay that much attention to detail. This is really, really significant. So we're going to look now at the text of Aurélia. The original title is Aurélia, Life and Dream, because the narrator says dream is a second life. This is a very brief text, so we have quite a volume here of selected writings, but only 50 pages of this is devoted to the actual final published text of Aurélia. It is divided into two parts that are exactly equal. So we have it like really split into two equal parts. It deals with dreams and delusions. So we are in a very interesting terrain right here. And Nerval, the author himself, points out his influences or the traditions that he was positioning himself in. He cites as an influence Apuleius, of course, with the Golden Ass, Dante with the Divine Comedy, but also with the Vita Nuova, which is a text that I would like to explore with you one of these days, just so you know, and also Swedenborg. Now, there's a fourth very important influence that he doesn't mention, and I think he doesn't mention it because it's really not necessary once you mention Dante, and that is the biblical book of Revelation, also known as the Apocalypse. It's the last book in the Christian Bible. So we're going to look now at the contents a little bit. We're going to go in the order that they appear in the book. So we're going to start, of course, with the first part. And to quote the author and or narrator here, Aurélia is about the overflow of dream into real life. Nerval tells us about his illness, but he also tells us that at that time, when he was ill, he felt great. Let me share with you a quote here that you can find on the first page of the text itself, or if you're looking at this edition, this is on page 265. He says, "At times, I believed my strength and energy had redoubled. I seemed to know everything, understand everything. My imagination afforded me infinite delights. Having recovered what men call reason, must I lament the loss of such choice?" So his problem begins when he is rejected by a woman that he loves deeply. This is Aurélia, or if you want to look at it in a biographical sort of way, Jenny Colomb, the singer and actress that I was telling you about before. This woman is his Beatrice. She is his Laura, if we're going to connect him to some other great texts. So Aurélia, the text, presents a series of visions, some of them comforting, others frightening, and Nerval in this text converses with spirits, and he also meets his ancestors, though when he meets them, they don't really look the way they should or the way they did in real life. This is something that you may have experienced in dreams. For example, something that happens to me all the time is I may have a dream, and in this dream I may meet my best friend. But the best friend in the dream doesn't look anything like my best friend in real life, but I know that it's my best friend. You know what I'm saying? So you find a lot of that in this text because it really follows the logic of dreams. And we have an example in also the first part of the text where Nerval meets a bird, and this bird tells him about his ancestors, about his relatives. After that, he sees a man cultivating the soil, and this is what he says. "I recognized him as the same man who had spoken to me through the voice of the bird, and whether it was his words or my inner intuition of them, it became evident to me that our ancestors assumed the shape of certain animals in order to visit us on earth and take part in the various phases of our existence as silent observers." So besides this, you can tell that Nerval in this book is just creating his own personal mythology. We hear about the creation of spirits and how they fight each other. This is one of those eternal metaphysical battles that are taking place. So if you will, what we have here is a combination of Genesis and Revelation. So you're really looking at the first and at the last books of the Christian Bible. One thing that I really liked that I found in this text is one of my favorite themes ever. You have probably guessed which one I am talking about. That is, of course, the theme of the doppelganger. And we go to page 285 for a quote here that I can share with you on this topic. So he says, "Man is double." So you can see the doppelganger right there. "I feel two men within me," wrote a church father. The concurrence of two souls has implanted this compound seed in man's body, which displays two similar halves in all the organs of its structure. There is in every man a spectator and an actor, someone who speaks and someone who replies. The Orientals saw two enemies in this, the good genius and the evil genius. I asked myself, am I the good one? Am I the evil one? Either way, the other is against me. This concept of the other is just central to Nerval's work. Not only this text that we are looking at right now, but basically everything from his letters to his last poems and the last things that he ever wrote. Now in part two, we see a different type of narrator because Nerval experiences another breakdown. This is also autobiographical, if you want to look at it that way. And he tells us of the solace that he found in religion and spirituality. So this second part is really marked by a deeper kind of a metaphysical connection. And you may be wondering, what is the connection between this, right? Spirituality, religion, and dreams. Well, here's the thing. For Nerval, dream is a channel through which human beings can come to communicate with the spirit world. And this is something that really has its basis in scripture, right? Because you have, for example, the character of Joseph. And the other character of Joseph. So you have two Josephs right there for whom dreams are important, ways in which maybe they can interpret dreams, maybe God speaking to them through their dreams. So everything that you find here in that aspect, of course, has really a basis on scripture. And in this second part, what I was struck by is the tone. What you find here is just a lot of guilt, a lot of self-loathing. And another thing that is also evident in the second part is the double and conflicting influence or legacy of, on the one hand, Christianity, and on the other hand, the Enlightenment. So Nerval is really wandering between two worlds, as Matthew Arnold put it in that famous poem. So I really like that. It's directly connected to the idea of the doppelganger. So it's no surprise that it appeals to me. Now, as we approach the end of the text, this erratic behavior that the protagonist displays becomes more and more pronounced. It really intensifies. He is paranoid. He picks fights with people. He reads too much into things. He is over-interpreting, seeing signs all over the place. For example, he goes to the Museum of Natural History and he sees some animals there. When he looks at the animals, that makes him think of the flood. Then he goes outside and it starts to rain. And he thinks, oh my gosh, the flood is coming. This is the end of the world. That's what I mean when I say over-interpreting things. I have an apocalyptic vision here to share with you. This is on page 301. He says, the stars were shining up above. Suddenly it seemed to me that they had all gone dark at once, like the candles I had seen in church. I thought that the final hour had come, and that the end of the world announced by the apocalypse of St. John was near. I believed I saw a black sun in the vacant sky and the blood-red orb above the Tuileries. I said to myself, eternal night is upon us, and the darkness will be frightful. What will happen when they all realize there is no more sun? That image of the black sun is also important. It's tied to that sonnet that I mentioned, the one that Eliot quotes, El Desdichado. There's a line there talking about the black sun of melancholia. So there are many recurring images that you can find throughout his work. Now, at the culmination, I would say, of this text, Aurélia, what happens is that at one point Nerval says, it's a good idea to try to understand dreams. I think for him that is the realization that this whole experience brings him to. This notion that there's something to dreams, definitely, right? So it would be good to try to understand them. And after that, the text continues, of course, but, I just wanted to give you one of the most important ideas that you're going to find here so that you can explore it by yourself. There's one theme, besides all of the ones that I have mentioned already, right, that I wanted to explore a little bit more in detail, and that is the connection between genius and quote-unquote madness. Here's the story. Back when I was in college, I took a class titled Introduction to French Poetry, and each one of us had to choose a poet to present. And Jorge being Jorge, I chose two of them, okay? So one of them was Nerval, And the other one was a great poet that I hope to tell you about one of these days. So I gave my presentation, and at the end, somebody raised their hands. I always loved it when I got questions, and I still do. So if you have any questions, please send them my way. So anyway, somebody raised their hand and they asked me, so was Nerval insane? It was a simplistic question, so I gave a simplistic answer. I think I said something to the effect that the short answer is yes, but then I went into a whole story of the connection, very close connection sometimes, that you can find between genius and so-called madness. And Nerval is definitely an example of that. Nerval was definitely very, very eccentric. He had a lobster that he would take for walks in the streets of Paris. He wrote Je suis l'autre behind a picture of himself, and if you read about his life, you can find many, many more examples of that. Now, judging Aurélia just by the things that he wrote there, and assuming, and this is an assumption, okay, at the end of the day, that the text really reflects faithfully his state of mind, I say that, today he would probably be diagnosed with schizophrenia, he would probably be given medication, and that would probably help him to function and to lead a longer life. So when you think about it that way, this is really a very sad story. But leaving aside Nerval's mental health and all that, as far as it is possible to do that, and I don't mean that only in the context of Nerval, but in the context of everybody, basically, I believe that this author was really a genius. Besides, all of the other things that have been said about him, he was very conscious of the traditions that he belonged to, and at the same time, he was highly original. I think there has really been nobody quite like him. And that's one of the many reasons why I believe that he deserves to be read after so many years of his publishing his works. Now I want to explore a little bit his legacy before we come to the end of this video. I mentioned T.S. Eliot before. It may seem like a very simple thing. You may be thinking, Jorge, it's just a line in The Waste Land, which, very few people read anymore anyway. And that may be true. It may seem like a minor thing. But given the tremendous influence and impact of The Waste Land, I think that, you can be sure that thousands of readers, literally thousands of readers, I don't think I am exaggerating here, have discovered Nerval thanks to T.S. Eliot. Another connection, André Breton and the surrealists. They adopted Gérard de Nerval. They were interested, of course, in his delirious writing, in his preoccupation with dreams, in his imagery. For example, I see the footprint of Aurélia in Nadia by André Breton. Very different texts in many ways, but I think you can definitely make a connection with this one. And because there's a connection with this one, I think you can also hear echoes of Aurélia in Philippe Soupeau's Last Nights of Paris. And you can continue that. You can carry that influence to texts like Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar, also maybe to some of the novels of Patrick Modiano, where you also find this idea of trying to grasp that ethereal woman that disappears, this presence of the woman, almost a mythological figure right there. There's an author, French author, Kleber Hedens. He spoke of Nerval as notre seul romantique, our only romantic. It's part of the legacy too. And I actually be curious, my friends from France, if you would like to share, what do you think about that? Is it fair to call him the only romantic in France? Why would somebody call him that? Any ideas that you may have on that are absolutely welcome. And then finally, there's one last point that I wanted to mention in terms of the legacy of Gérard de Nerval, and that is the connection with the symbolists. Okay, the symbolist poets, they adopted Nerval. So that just by itself is a huge influence in so many poetic movements that came after that. As you may know, the symbolists come almost directly from Baudelaire. And if you add Nerval to that, then you think, okay, the symbolists influenced so many poetic movements. I can give you the example, because I come from Latin America, of Modernismo and all the repercussions that that had. So through that, through the symbolists, through Modernismo and all of the other poetic movements that were influenced by the symbolists, it's just a snowball effect. At the end of the day, you could say that Nerval really had just an amazing and far-reaching influence. So the bottom line here is that I think Aurélia is filled with unforgettable images. It is a text that is written in an apocalyptic, hypnotic mode that's just mesmerizes the reader. And it's also an invitation to kind of entertain a disquieting view of the world around us. It's a view of the world that would drive anybody mad, it would drive anybody to despair, because the text allows us, at least for a moment, to experience what many people suffer from every single day. People who are dealing with the kind of mental health issues that Nerval unfortunately experienced. So I think because of that, Aurélia is, among other things, for example, you could say that it is a descent into hell. It's definitely that. But it is also an opportunity to strengthen our sense of empathy and our sense of compassion for those who experience the world around us in this very painful way. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. Those are my 2 cents on Aurélia by Gérard de Nerval. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.